She locked the door when she saw him coming. 150 motorcycles filled the highway behind him, the Hells Angels patch across his chest, the grey beard, the tattoos, the 30 years of everything she had ever been warned about. Walking toward her window in 93 degrees of Tennessee heat. She was 8 months pregnant, alone. In labor on the shoulder of I-40, contractions 4 minutes apart, phone battery at 11%, and 47 miles from the nearest hospital. She locked the door, and Owen Hargrove stopped 2 feet from the glass and said, "I'm not moving until you and your baby are safe. That's all." What happened next on that highway would change what she believed about people for the rest of her life. Rachel Donovan had always believed in signs, not in any mystical way. She was too practical for that, too grounded in the kind of woman who packed extra granola bars in her purse and kept a spare tire kit in the trunk. But she believed that sometimes the world sent you signals, quiet nudges in the right direction, and the smart thing to do was pay attention to them. She had ignored 3 of them that morning. The first was the weather app on her phone, which had shown a heat advisory for Middle Tennessee, temperatures expected to climb to 94 degrees by noon, with humidity that would make it feel closer to 102. August in Tennessee was not a season. It was a condition. A relentless, sweat-soaked, lung-heavy condition that settled over the state like a wool blanket and refused to lift until October. The second was the voicemail from her mother, Sandra Brewer, left at 6:47 in the morning in that careful, unhurried tone she used when she was trying not to sound worried. "Rachel, honey, I've been thinking. Maybe you should wait 1 more week. The doctor said 36 weeks is fine for travel, but 37 is better. Just call me when you wake up." She had listened to it twice, set the phone face down on the kitchen counter, and finished packing her overnight bag. The third was her body. The low, dull ache that had started sometime around midnight, moving through her lower back in slow, deliberate waves. She had told herself it was Braxton Hicks. She had told herself this 4 times since waking up. She had told herself this again as she lowered herself behind the wheel of her white Honda CR-V, adjusted the seat back to accommodate her stomach, and pulled out of the Nashville apartment complex at 7:15, eastbound on Interstate 40. She was 8 months pregnant, 29 years old, and she was alone. Daniel, her husband, was in Charlotte for work, a consulting contract that had stretched from 3 weeks into 5, then into indefinite. He had offered to come home. She had told him not to. Her mother's hip surgery had gone well, but recovery was slow, and Rachel needed to be there, needed to see it for herself, needed to feel useful in the way that only proximity allows. Cookeville was 90 miles from Nashville, an hour and 20 minutes on a clear day. She had driven it a dozen times in her life. She knew every mile marker, every rest stop, every exit. She did not know that this drive would be different. The morning was already building toward brutal as she merged onto I-40 East, the Nashville skyline dissolving in the rearview mirror into a haze of summer humidity. The air conditioning in the CR-V worked in that half-hearted way that newer cars sometimes do. Technically functional, never quite enough. She kept it cranked to maximum and pointed all 4 vents at her face and neck. The road stretched ahead, flat and pale in the early light, flanked by cedar trees and red clay embankments. Billboards advertised outlet malls, barbecue joints, and personal injury lawyers with photogenic smiles. Rachel drove with both hands on the wheel. She had read somewhere that in the 3rd trimester, the center of gravity shifts so dramatically that the body's relationship to physical space changes. You miscalculate distances, overestimate clearances, move through the world with a new kind of uncertainty. She felt it most when driving. The constant readjustment. The heightened awareness of her own size, her own weight, the way the seatbelt pulled across her stomach with every slight curve of the road. The ache in her back had not disappeared. If anything, it had sharpened slightly, become more insistent. She shifted in her seat, changed the radio station, finished the last of her water bottle and set it in the cup holder. She was 23 miles east of Nashville, somewhere near the Mount Juliet interchange, when she first heard them. The sound came before the sight, a deep, collective rumble that she felt in her chest before she registered it with her ears. A mechanical thunder, low and rhythmic and vast, building from somewhere behind her with the slow inevitability of a weather system. She checked her mirrors and saw them, a column of motorcycles stretching so far back she couldn't find where it ended, rolling eastbound in a tight, disciplined formation, 2 by 2, filling the left lane and spilling into her own. 150 motorcycles, 279 years of combined road history, the collective roar of engines that had logged more miles between them than most people would cover in a lifetime. Rachel Donovan gripped the wheel a little tighter. She knew the patch before she could read it, had grown up knowing it, the way you grow up knowing certain symbols carry certain weight without ever being formally taught. The red and white of the Hells Angels colors was one of those symbols. She had heard the stories. Everyone in America had heard the stories. Decades of headlines, documentaries, whispered warnings. Her father, a retired sheriff's deputy from Wilson County, had used them as a cautionary reference point so many times throughout her childhood that the words Hells Angels had become, in her mind, synonymous with danger without nuance, with threat without context. She moved to the right lane, kept her eyes forward, told herself she was being sensible. The column rolled past her in a long, thundering wave, leather jackets and riding boots, chrome catching the August sun, engines singing at a frequency that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and register somewhere lower, somewhere instinctive. She caught glimpses of them in her peripheral vision and kept her gaze on the road ahead. The way you keep your gaze away from a dog you are not certain about. She was trying to ignore the next wave of pain when it arrived. It was nothing like the previous aches, nothing like the dull background pressure she had spent the morning rationalizing away. This was something different in kind, not just degree, a clenching, full-body contraction that moved through her abdomen like a tide, stealing her breath, narrowing her vision at the edges, demanding her complete and immediate attention. Rachel Donovan's foot came off the accelerator. The CRV slowed. Her right hand moved to her stomach without her consciously directing it. The contraction held for 30 seconds, 40, and then released slowly, leaving behind a trembling, shallow-breathing woman on the shoulder of Interstate 40. Hazard lights blinking in the August heat, 47 miles from the nearest hospital she had the number for. The motorcycle convoy rolled past her as she sat there, gathering herself, trying to decide what her body was telling her. She was still deciding when the first bike began to slow. Owen Hargrove had been riding this stretch of I-40 every August 14th for 3 years. He would ride it every year for the rest of his life, if his body allowed it, and he suspected his body would allow it for a good while yet. 52 years old, 6'1", 215 pounds of a man who had spent 30 years doing things that most people only read about in magazines that alternated between glorifying and condemning him. He had been riding motorcycles since he was 14. He had been a Hells Angel since he was 23. He did not spend much time explaining himself to people who had already decided what he was. The ride was called the Brick Run. It had started 3 years ago, the August after Jimmy Wallace, Brick to everyone who knew him, a nickname earned from a stubborn refusal to back down from anything harder than a brick wall, had died on this same stretch of highway. Not from violence, not from anything that would make for a dramatic story. A deer had stepped off the embankment at dusk, directly into Brick's path, and that had been that. 44 years old, 17 years with the club, a man who could fix any engine ever made and who cried openly at his daughter's dance recitals, gone in a half-second of bad timing and bad luck. The Brick Run was not a protest or a statement. It was just 150 men and women on motorcycles, riding the road their brother had died on because the road deserved to know it hadn't forgotten him. Owen rode at the front. He always rode at the front on this particular day, not because the club required it, but because he had been Brick's closest friend for 20 years, and being at the front felt like leading the procession the way Brick would have wanted it led. Fast, clean, no fuss. He spotted the white CRV from 400 yards out. In 30 years of riding, Owen Hargrove had developed the kind of road awareness that had less to do with training and more to do with accumulated consequence. You learned to read the highway the way a reader learns to read a page, not word by word, but in whole shapes, in patterns, in the particular way that certain arrangements of things meant danger before the specific details resolved themselves. The car on the shoulder with its hazards going was not unusual. The way it had stopped, suddenly, without pulling fully clear of the lane, still partly in the travel lane, was. He signalled. The hand signal moved back through the column like a wave through water. Flat palm, fingers spread, pushed down, slow. Owen pulled his Road King to the shoulder behind the CRV and killed the engine. Behind him, 149 motorcycles did the same. The sudden silence on a stretch of highway that had been roaring with engine noise 60 seconds earlier was a remarkable thing. Owen sat for a moment in that silence, reading the situation. White CRV, Tennessee plates. The driver visible through the rear window, a woman alone, head dropped forward. The slow blink of the hazard lights. He dismounted and walked to the driver's side window. She saw him coming, and he watched her react the way he had watched people react to him his entire adult life. The slight stiffening, the eyes going wide, the hands moving without conscious direction toward the door lock. He heard the click of it from 6 feet away. He had been hearing that sound for 30 years. He had stopped taking it personally about 25 years ago. He stopped 2 feet from the window, did not touch the car, did not try the handle. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was not what people expected, not rough or threatening, but measured, with the particular quality of a man who spoke carefully because he had learned that careless words made expensive messes. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to make sure you're okay." Through the glass, he could see her clearly now. Young, late 20s at most. Brown hair pulled back from a face that was pale under a summer tan, eyes that were green and wide and frightened and, beneath the fear, in tremendous pain. And the stomach. 8 months at least, maybe more. The seatbelt crossing over it at an angle that looked uncomfortable. She was not okay. He could see that from where he stood without any medical training at all. "I can see you're in pain," he said, still not touching the car. "I'm not moving until I know you and your baby are safe. That's all. I promise you, that's all." A long moment, the kind of moment that decides things. Owen waited it out without moving. She rolled the window down 2 inches. "I think I'm in labor," she said. Her voice was thin, working hard to stay steady. "My contractions are—" She paused as another one moved through her, a visible thing, a wave crossing her face. "They're about 6 minutes apart, maybe 5. "Okay." Owen turned toward the column. Walter Simmons had been with the club for 11 years. Before that, he'd been a paramedic with the Davidson County EMS for 14 years, which the club had come to regard as the most useful biographical fact about any of its members. He was 51 years old, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped grey hair and the particular calm of a man who had seen enough genuine emergencies that nothing less than a genuine emergency registered on his face as alarm. He was already walking toward the car when Owen called his name. "What are we dealing with?" Walt said, stopping beside Owen and assessing the situation through the window with the same rapid, efficient read that 30 years of emergency work gives a person. "Active labor," Owen said. "Contractions 5 to 6 minutes." Walt nodded. He leaned slightly toward the window, not crowding it. "Ma'am, my name is Walter Simmons. I was a paramedic for 14 years. I'm going to call 911 right now and get EMS on the way, and I'm going to stay right here with you until they arrive. Is that okay?" Another pause, another assessment behind those green eyes. Fear and pain, and the particular calculus of a woman alone on a highway trying to determine who she could trust. "Okay," she said. Owen stepped back and pulled out his phone. Behind him, without needing to be told, the brick run reorganized itself. Riders moved their bikes to form a perimeter around the CRV, a rough semicircle of chrome and leather that closed off the shoulder and the adjacent lane. Several members moved back along the highway to redirect approaching traffic, arms out, waving cars into the far left lane. Others positioned themselves as visible markers at intervals down the road. Within 4 minutes of Owen Hargrove making a hand signal from the front of the column, 150 people had converted themselves from a funeral procession into an emergency response team. None of them had been asked to do it. None of them needed to be. Owen reached the 911 dispatcher on the third ring. The news was not good. The dispatcher's voice was professional and steady, but the information she delivered had an edge to it that Owen recognized immediately. The particular quality of a person managing multiple emergencies simultaneously and doing the math on resources in real time. "Sir, I have a major multi-vehicle accident on I-40 westbound near milepost 280. All available EMS units in Putnam and Smith counties are currently deployed. I can get a unit to your location, but I need to be honest with you. We're looking at 30 to 35 minutes minimum." Owen processed this without expression. "She's in active labor. Contractions are approximately 5 minutes apart." A brief pause on the line. "Is there anyone with medical training on scene?" "Yes, former paramedic." "Good. Keep him on with her. I'm going to patch you through to a labor and delivery nurse at Cookeville Regional who can provide guidance. Do not disconnect." A click, a brief hold tone, and then a new voice, calm, female, experienced. Owen walked back to the CRV and held the phone up to the window opening. "I've got a nurse from the hospital on the line. Her name is Carol. She's going to help Walt." Rachel Donovan looked at the phone, then at Owen, then at Walt, who was crouched beside the open window now, having finally coaxed her into rolling it fully down. She took the phone. "Hi, Rachel," said the voice from Cookeville Regional. "My name is Carol. I hear you're having a pretty exciting morning." Something happened in Rachel's face when she heard that voice. A nurse, a woman, a calm, professional human being on the other end of a phone. Some small portion of the terror receded, not all of it, but enough. "That's one way to put it," Rachel said. Owen stepped back, giving them space. He stood 6 feet from the car and watched his people work. He had been watching his people work for 29 years, in contexts that range from the mundane to the serious to the genuinely dangerous. And what he was watching now was the same thing he always watched. A group of individuals who had chosen each other, who had built something together that the outside world consistently misread as threat, functioning with a quiet competence and a collective care that most people never got the chance to see. 40 feet back, 3 of his riders had set up an impromptu traffic control system. Bobby Chen, who during the week managed 2 auto body shops in Nashville, was directing eastbound traffic around the perimeter with the confidence of a man who had done this before, because he had, having spent 6 years as a highway patrol officer in his 20s, before a knee injury ended that career. Beside him, Terence Fuller, 28 years old, first year with the club, a high school math teacher in Murfreesboro, was using his phone's flashlight to signal to oncoming drivers despite the blazing daylight, because the gesture of warning was what mattered. Further back still, a knot of bikes had formed a buffer that now extended 150 yards down the eastbound lanes. Traffic had slowed to a crawl. Drivers in stopped cars were getting out, some with concern on their faces, some with irritation, one man in a black pickup truck with building anger. Owen saw the pickup truck man get out, watched him take in the scene, the motorcycles, the perimeter, the wall of leather, and watched the man's face decide incorrectly that this was something other than what it was. The man started walking toward the CRV with the stride of someone who had appointed himself the voice of common grievance. "What in the—" he began. Tommy Park stepped in front of him. Tommy was 34, Korean-American, quiet in the way that some people are quiet because they have nothing to prove. He stood between the man and the car and said simply, "There's a woman in labor in that vehicle. EMS is on the way. We need you to return to your truck." The man stared at Tommy. Tommy looked back at him with an expression that was entirely without aggression and entirely without give. "Return to your truck," Tommy said again. The man returned to his truck. Inside the CRV, Rachel Donovan was fighting her own battle. The contractions were 4 minutes apart now, and the pain was beyond anything she had been prepared for, beyond the books and the classes and the careful descriptions from friends who had tried to explain it in advance. It was not sharp, the way she had expected pain to be sharp. It was a consuming thing, total and systemic, the kind of pain that evacuated coherent thought and left only body, only breath, only the immediate. Walt was talking her through it. His voice was the anchor she reached for between waves. "You're doing well. Just breathe through it. Don't fight it. Let it move through you and it'll pass." He had done this before, not under these exact conditions, but in the back of an ambulance, on the side of a road, in the floor of a kitchen, in a parking lot outside a grocery store. Labor did not wait for convenient locations. "How far out is EMS?" Rachel asked between contractions. Walt looked at Owen. Owen held up both hands, fingers spread. 20 minutes. "Getting close," Walt said. He did not specify in which direction. Rachel closed her eyes, opened them again. She looked at Owen, this large, bearded, tattooed man standing outside her car in the Tennessee heat, who had stopped 150 motorcycles and called a nurse from a hospital and was now standing guard over her on the side of a highway like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Owen thought about it. He was not a man who gave quick answers to real questions. "Because you needed help," he said. "That's the whole reason." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Then another contraction arrived, and her world narrowed again to breath and body, and the long, patient voice of Walter Simmons counting seconds beside her. She had locked the door when she saw him coming. She tried, in the brief window between contractions, to reckon with that, with what she had expected and what was actually happening. With the 30 years of accumulated warning about men who wore this patch, and the reality of those same men forming a wall around her car on a burning Tennessee highway so that no one could see her, so that the traffic couldn't reach her, so that she was, improbably and completely, protected. The reckoning would take longer than the next 20 minutes. She knew that already. But it had begun. At 11:27, on the morning of August 14th, on a stretch of Interstate 40 between Lebanon and Cookeville, Tennessee, in 93 degrees of direct August sunlight, with the smell of hot asphalt and engine oil heavy in the air, Rachel Donovan's son was born. His name, when she would give it 3 days later in the quieter environment of Cookeville Regional Medical Center, would be James. For reasons she would explain to her husband Daniel when he arrived from Charlotte, pale and shaken and simultaneously terrified and overwhelmed by gratitude, in a voice that kept almost breaking. But that came later. What came first was the moment itself, the improbable, loud, stubbornly physical, entirely human fact of a new person arriving in the world on the shoulder of a major interstate in the state of Tennessee, delivered by a former paramedic with taped knuckles and a Hells Angels patch on his back, while 149 members of the same club held the highway and kept the world at a distance. The final 20 minutes had been the longest of Rachel Donovan's life. The contractions had compressed to 2 minutes apart. Carol's voice on the phone had shifted from reassuring to operational, clear, direct, giving Walt and Rachel specific instructions, timing each stage, measuring progress against the clock. Rachel had her seat fully reclined, the car doors open on both sides for air circulation. The August heat was brutal and constant, but Owen had positioned 2 large men with their bikes on either side of the car, creating partial shade from the sun's direct glare. Sandra Merritt had appeared at some point. Owen hadn't directed her there, she had simply moved, the way experienced people move in emergencies toward where they are needed. Sandra was 44, had ridden with the club for 6 years, and had 3 children of her own. She had reached through the passenger side door and taken Rachel's hand without asking permission, and without needing to explain herself. Rachel had held on. "You've got this," Sandra said, in the flat, practical tone of someone who means it, rather than someone who is trying to mean it. "This baby is coming healthy, and you are going to be fine." "You can't know that," Rachel said through gritted teeth. "I know it," Sandra said. "Trust me on this one." Owen stood at the front of the car, not watching the delivery, giving Rachel what privacy the open highway allowed, but present, facing outward toward the column of stopped traffic and the shimmering heat haze rising from the asphalt. He had his phone in his hand and kept the line to dispatch open. The EMS unit was 12 minutes out, then 10. Then 8. At 9 minutes out, Rachel made a sound that Walt recognized as transition, and he told Carol, and Carol said, "Okay, we're going to do this right now." The bikers nearest the car, the ones maintaining the inner perimeter, turned their backs to the vehicle without being asked. They faced outward, toward the highway, toward the line of waiting cars and the strange, suspended stillness of that particular stretch of road. One of them, Frank Bishop, who had ridden with the club for 22 years and who cried at weddings and had never once in his adult life discussed his emotions openly with another person, gripped the handlebars of his parked bike and breathed steadily through the sound of a woman in labor 20 feet away, and thought about nothing in particular except that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The moment arrived at 11:27. Walter Simmons, in a voice that was calm and sure and warm in a way that his regular expression rarely permitted, said, "There he is. There he is, Rachel. He's here." A sound that was small and enormous at the same time. The specific, definitive cry of a newborn rose from the interior of the white CRV and moved outward across the stopped highway. Owen Hargrove heard it and closed his eyes for 1 second. Opened them. The road was still there. The sun was still there. The line of bikes and the line of cars and the terrible beauty of the Tennessee summer were all still exactly where they were. Somewhere behind him, someone began to clap. Then another person. Then a third. Then a sound moved down the column of 150 Hell's Angels. Not a cheer, not a roar, but a sustained collective sound that was part relief and part something harder to name. Bobby Chen, directing traffic 40 yards back, heard it and understood what it meant without needing to ask. He turned to the nearest stopped car, a minivan with a family of 4 inside, a mother and father, and 2 small kids with their faces pressed against the glass, and gave them a thumbs up. The mother covered her mouth with both hands. The EMS unit arrived 3 minutes later, lights going, its siren winding down as it pulled to the shoulder, and the Hell's Angels perimeter parted to let it through with the same organized efficiency it had shown in forming. 2 paramedics, a young woman named Priya and a man named Thomas, who had been with Davidson County EMS for 8 years, came out with a stretcher and stopped for one brief, involuntary moment at the sight of the scene in front of them. 150 motorcycles. A tight perimeter around a white CRV, 150 men and women in leather, standing steady in the heat, watching the ambulance arrive with expressions that were quietly, unmistakably satisfied. Thomas recovered first. He looked at Walt, who was crouched by the open car door. "What have we got?" "Male infant, born approximately 3 minutes ago. Mother is 29, no major complications, vitals stable. Infant is responsive, color good, breathing well. We kept the cord intact for you." Walt stood and stepped back with the precise efficiency of a professional handing off to a professional. "She did great." Thomas nodded, looked at Walt's patch, looked at Owen, looked at the 150 people on the shoulder of Interstate 40. "Good work," he said. Owen nodded once. That was enough. 3 days later, in room 214 of Cookville Regional Medical Center, Rachel Donovan sat in a hospital bed with her son against her chest and watched the video for the 6th time. Someone, a driver in one of the stopped cars, a woman named Beth Caldwell from Lebanon, who had been on her way to visit her sister and had instead witnessed something she couldn't quite find the right language for, had filmed the last 12 minutes of the scene from her car window. Not intrusively, not zoomed in on Rachel's car, but widely. The highway, the perimeter of bikes, the men and women standing in the heat with their backs turned, the particular configuration of human beings who had chosen to be a wall. The video was 8 minutes long. It had been shared 400,000 times in 72 hours. Rachel watched the part she always watched, the moment just after James was born, when the sound of his cry moved down the column of bikes and the collective response moved back through the group. On the small phone screen, with the August haze softening everything, it looked like a ripple, like something passing through water. Daniel sat beside her, still slightly dazed. He had driven through the night from Charlotte and arrived at the hospital 12 hours after James, having cried once in the parking lot and composed himself before coming upstairs. He watched the video over her shoulder and didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say that the video didn't say better. "His name," Rachel said. She had been sitting with this for 3 days. Daniel looked at her. "James," she said. "I want to name him James." Daniel understood before she explained it. She had told him about the brick run, about what Owen had said when she asked why they stopped, about Walt counting seconds by her side, about Sandra's hand in hers. He understood that the name was not a tribute in any formal sense, but an acknowledgement, a recognition that the first day of James Donovan's life had been shaped in ways that mattered by a man named Jimmy Wallace, who had died on the same highway 3 years before, on the same date, and whose friends had been riding in his memory when they stopped for her. "James," Daniel said. "Yeah, that's right." The letter took Rachel 2 weeks to write. Not because she didn't know what she wanted to say, she knew almost immediately, but because getting the words to carry the weight of what she meant was harder than she expected. She wrote 6 drafts, discarded 5. The 6th was 2 pages, handwritten on plain white paper. She addressed it to Owen Hargrove, CO, the Nashville chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. She had found the address through a club member who had left his card tucked under her windshield wiper the morning of the incident, with a handwritten note on the back that said simply, "Glad you're okay. Walt." She mailed it on a Tuesday morning in early September, James asleep in the car seat behind her, Nashville beginning its slow retreat from summer. She didn't know if Owen would receive it or read it, or whether the address was even right. He received it on a Thursday. Owen read it at his kitchen table in East Nashville, coffee going cold beside him, the morning light coming in at a low angle through the window above the sink. He read it once through without stopping. Then he read it again more slowly. She wrote about fear, about the specific, learned fear she had carried toward men like him for her entire adult life, where it came from, what it was built from. She did not sanitize it or apologize for it. She described it plainly as a fact. And she wrote about what it meant to have that fear, fear she had held for 30 years, fear she had reinforced without ever examining, dismantled by the reality of what those men had done on a highway in the August heat. She wrote, "I grew up being told what you were. I believed it without ever asking whether it was true. You did something on that road that I don't have a clean way to explain or categorize, and I think that's because what you didn't fit into any of the boxes I had built for people like you, and that's my failure, not yours. It was always my failure." She wrote about James, his weight, his eyes, the specific way he held his own hands when he slept. She wrote that he was named for Brick, and she hoped that was okay, and that she had explained to Daniel why, and that when James was old enough she would explain it to James. She wrote at the end, "I don't know much about who you are or how you live or what your life looks like from the inside. I don't think I'm supposed to know, but I know what I saw on that road. I know what it felt like to be afraid of someone and then to be held safe by that same someone. I know what it means that 150 people stopped everything they were doing because one stranger needed help. I will spend a long time thinking about what that means. I think that's probably the right thing to do." Owen set the letter on the table, sat with it for a while in the morning light. Then he folded it carefully along its original creases, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the same drawer where he kept the photograph of Brick, the one from 15 years ago, the two of them outside a diner in Memphis, laughing at something that neither of them could remember afterward, squinting into the sun. The following August 14th, at the start of the fourth Brick run, Owen stood at the front of the column on the same stretch of I-40, in the same heat, under the same Tennessee sky, and he did something he had never done before at the start of this ride. He stopped. He pulled his Road King to the shoulder, exactly where he had stopped the year before. He sat on the idling bike for a moment and looked at the road, at the particular patch of asphalt that had been, 1 year ago, the first place in James Donovan's life. Behind him, without knowing exactly why, the column stopped too. 150 motorcycles going quiet. The sound of the Tennessee summer, cicadas, wind, the distant hum of traffic on the other lanes, filling the space where the engines had been. Owen reached into his jacket pocket and held Rachel's words in his mind. "I know what it felt like to be afraid of someone and then to be held safe by that same someone." He held Walt's steadiness, Sandra's outstretched hand, Tommy's quiet certainty in front of a man who had decided something wrong. He held the sound of a newborn cry moving down a column of 150 people who had simply, without ceremony, done the right thing. And then he did something that Owen Hargrove almost never did, which was to let himself be moved completely by a moment, not managing it, not containing it, not converting it into action or decision or forward motion, but simply feeling the full weight of it. A woman had been afraid of him. A woman had needed help. The two things had occupied the same moment, and he and his people had responded to the second thing without hesitation, the way you respond to what is actually in front of you rather than what you were told to expect. That was the whole of it, he thought. That was the whole reason. He started the engine, signaled forward. The column began to move. They rode east into the climbing Tennessee sun, 150 strong, carrying the names of the people they'd lost, and the memory of the people they'd helped, and the long accumulated weight of being consistently misunderstood by a world that had decided what they were before it looked closely enough to see what they actually did. The road unfurled ahead of them like a sentence waiting to be finished. Owen Hargrove rode it the way he rode everything, straight, steady, and without apology, the way Brick would have wanted.